Okay, alright. We're dealing with compound complex sentences. And from the definition on the screen, you can obviously see that a compound complex sentence contains two or more independent clauses and at least one subordinate clause. And so off to the side here, I have broken out what each of the types of sentences require based upon our previous lecture. So simple, one independent clause; compound, two independent clauses; complex sentence, one independent clause plus one subordinate clause, or it can be more than one subordinate clause. So if I were to write out the formula, if you will, for a compound complex sentence, CCX, then I'd say, well, we have CCX must equal, naturally, compound plus complex sentence, right? Well, sometimes just saying I'm looking for a compound sentence or I'm looking for a complex sentence is by itself a little difficult. So it's easier to think of it in their component parts. A compound sentence is going to be an independent clause plus an independent clause, and a complex sentence is going to be an independent clause plus a subordinate clause. That's what equals a compound complex sentence. Alright, so once you realize, oh, I'm just dealing at the very minimum with three clauses, another step that you can go to is say, well, let me find the verbs. Verb, verb, verb. Each of them will have their own verb, defining a separate action, if you will. So the first step when dealing with a very long sentence, and you're trying to classify it as a very long compound sentence or a very long complex sentence or a very long compound complex sentence, count the verbs. If you have three verbs, at least you know that it's a possible compound complex sentence. There's other things you'll look at, and we'll look at those in a second. So let's look at a sentence here. This is from Sigmund Freud. The writer does the same thing as the child at play. He creates a world of fantasy which he takes very seriously. So let's first start with counting the verbs. Does, right? First verb, creates. Second verb, takes. Third verb. Okay, we have three verbs here. Now we have to figure out if these three verbs are, what, obviously for the purposes of today's lecture, I know a simple sentence can have compound verbs, but we're going to assume that all the verbs are going to be in separate clauses for today. So let's look at these sentences, these clauses, and see if they're independent or subordinate. All right, so this clause here does not begin with a relative pronoun or subordinate conjunction. So we can say with some degree of certainty this is an independent clause. The writer does the same thing as the child at play. It can stand on its own. Again, we have here no subordinate clause, no subordinate conjunction or relative pronoun. Again, another independent clause. And in this case, we have this relative pronoun right there. So making this sentence, this little clause right here, subordinate. Now, we have I plus S, right? The formula alone says this is a complex sentence. We can also look for other factors, right? We have this nice semicolon right here. That clearly indicates that it's a compound sentence, right? A compound sentence is somewhere in this. Remember, a compound sentence is joined by either a semicolon, two independent clauses joined by a semicolon, or joined by a comma plus coordinating conjunction. And the coordinating conjunctions, remember, are fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay, so we have a compound sentence here, and a complex sentence here. Essentially, he creates a world of fantasy, which he takes very seriously. Let's look at another sentence. In a world where marriage is illegal, a band of woodland ninjas defies the law when they create a secret wedding village. Now, I got this sentence from the Script Frenzy website, the script generator, and it's fantastic for things like this. So, let's look at the verbs. Is, defies, and they create. Okay, so let's look at each of these clauses. We'll start with, let's start with the first one. In a world where marriage is legal. Now you can just say that and you know that you're not dealing with an independent clause, because if you said it to anyone, they would say, what are you talking about? And so this is subordinate clause. A merry band of woodland ninjas defies the law. Well, while it is odd, it is certainly an independent clause, and we have when they create a secret wedding village. Well, this one has this very nice relative pronoun, subordinating conjunction, and which lets us know that we're dealing with a subordinate clause. Now, another thing to look at, again, we're looking for criteria that make classification easier. And if we have subordinate clause first, independent clause second, there's always going to be a comma separating them. Subordinate clause first, independent clause second, always a comma, right? If the independent clause is first and the subordinate clause is second, there's almost never a comma unless you're dealing with an unusual circumstance dealing with which, or if the subordinate clause is non-essential. And so we have the subordinate clause right here, no comma, right? But what do we have here? We have subordinate clause, subordinate, we have independent clause, right? And we have subordinate clause, right? So what does this equal? This equals a complex sentence. This is not a compound complex sentence, even though it is a very long and complicated sentence. However, it only takes changing one thing to make it compound complex. So let's see. In a world where marriage is illegal, a merry band of woodland ninjas defies the law, comma, yet they create a secret wedding village. So they create a secret wedding village, but they create a secret wedding village. Each of these has a subtly different meaning, and depending upon what grammatical or what stylistic choice you're going to make, you would choose your own coordinating conjunction. Yet we clearly have a compound complex sentence here. We could even make it where it was something even simpler. Semicolon. In a world where marriage is illegal, a merry band of woodland ninjas defies the law. They create a secret wedding village. Now, this makes it a little choppier, but you might want sort of a longer pause, if you will, maybe for dramatic emphasis. All right. Let's get another one. A traveling shoe salesman sets out on a journey of hope, yet he is detained by a giant lobster that can only be seen by toddlers after a nightmare. Ooh. So let's find the verbs here. We have sets, is, or is detained, if you wish, is, and be seen. Okay, so we have a traveling shoeman sets out on a journey of hope. Okay, we're dealing, that's an independent clause. Yet he is detained by a giant lobster. Okay, that is definitely subordinating clause. That can only be seen by toddlers after a nightmare. Again, subordinating clause, right? Now, the problem here is, that is not a subordinating clause. My bad. Fanboys, yes. Fanboys for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. There it is. That's what I get for not writing a script for these things. Yes, so we're definitely dealing with a independent plus subordinate clause, I plus S, dealing with compound complex sentence. Let's look at another. All right. After he wakes from a 100-year nap, a sun-worshipping albino finds a toaster that could change the world, but he's worried it will steal his soul. Okay, so let's find the verbs. After he wakes from a 100-year nap, a sun-worshipping albino finds a toaster that could change the world, that could change, but is worried it will steal, right? We got a lot of verbs in this sentence. All right, still, all of them can be broken down into different clauses, so let's have a look at it. After he wakes from a 100-year nap, he wakes, this is definitely after, nice, subordinating clause, we're dealing with a subordinating conjunction, we're dealing with a subordinating clause. A sun-worshipping albino finds a toaster, right? So that's pretty much where that one ends. Finds a toaster, this is independent clause. Again, a nice clue is that we have S, comma, I, that's a standard construction in complex sentences. That could change the world. Now again, this is a adjective clause here because that is modifying toaster, but still that makes this still a subordinating clause. So let's look at our count here. We have subordinating independent, subordinating, right? Still a complex sentence, right? SIS, that still equals complex. But then we have comma plus fanboys here, which makes he is worried it will steal his soul, an independent clause. Therefore, we have independent, right? SISI. Now, technically, you might say, well, wait a minute. These two independent clauses aren't right next to each other. They don't have to be. Remember, for a compound complex sentence to work, it just needs I plus S. And they can be in any order. And in this case, we have two S's, two I's, still counts as a compound complex sentence. Let's look at another sentence. And of course, you couldn't imagine me not revisiting Og. Let's have a look at it. But first thing I want you to see is, well, I'll read it to you. While Og walks through woods, Tiger attacks, Og retreats, and is left with a lingering sense of Og's own mortality. Now, you can see the verbs here. Take a moment, see if you can find the verbs on your own, and more importantly, see if you can find the grammatical error. I put it in there on purpose because a lot of students make this mistake. Okay, let's try to find the verbs. Walks through the woods, Tiger attacks, Og retreats, is left with a lingering sense of Og's immortality. All right? Again, if you're in doubt of finding the verbs, we can say, well, let's strike out the phrases of Og's own mortality, with a lingering sense, right? Through woods. So all we're left is, while Og walks, Tiger attacks, Og retreats, and is left. Okay, so, but let's get rid of a lot of these words here because it's easier to see. Okay, so we have walks, attacks, retreats, is. Okay, or is left if you wish, but we'll just stick with is for now. Now what's the problem here? We have while Og walks through the woods. Now this is, we have this nice construction here. So we have this is a subordinating clause. Tiger attacks. This is an independent clause. Again, we're dealing with S, I equals complex sentence, right? Ooh, look at that. Semicolon. Already, we know that we have a compound sentence in play here. So we have independent clause, Og retreats, second independent clause. All right, so now we know we're dealing with compound sentence. But here's the problem. We have this comma and, right? Does this make this its own independent clause? Right? What's the problem? Can you see what the problem is? I will tell you. Right here. There is no subject. There is no subject right here. I'll draw. No subject, right? And so, in order for this to be an independent clause, it has to have a subject and a verb. But we don't have a subject. So this retreats, and is a compound verb. It's an R right there. Compound verb, right? And therefore, you're not dealing with another independent clause. Just put that in there because I want you to be able to look for those sort of things, right? But if we wanted to add up the clauses here, we have subordinate plus independent, and that is clearly compound complex sentence. Okay, let's do a quick recap. First off, compound complex sentence is going to contain at least two independent clauses and at least one subordinate clause, right? And when you're looking at seeing what you're dealing with is, add up the verbs. Find the verbs, add them up, figure out what clauses they're in. If you have the construction of independent plus subordinate, you know you're dealing with a compound complex sentence. If you find three verbs and three clauses, see if you can look for some hallmarks. A semicolon or a comma plus a coordinating conjunction. This clearly lets you know you're dealing with a compound sentence. A subordinating clause anywhere in there knows you're dealing with a subordinate clause. So, a subordinate clause, which means you know you're dealing with a complex sentence.